Have you guys ever heard of a term called, it's actually a meme, it's called the often crushing machine. The often crushing machine. Has anybody ever heard of the often crushing machine? Because you've reminded me of that. So I work with an organization called SA Harvest. I sit on the board. We rescue food from big retailers, and those stats are real. Like 90 million people in South Africa go to bed hungry every night. So we rescue food from big retailers and big farmers, and then we give it to community-based organization to feed the communities, right? And often, like today's Nelson Mandela Day, we're doing an event next door, and everybody's either painting a school or feeding children today. Like, it only happens once a year, kind of thing, right? Anyway, what the often crushing machine is that people like us or SA Harvest often get applauded for doing, as they call it, the Lord's work, right? Feeding kids and all of that. But no one ever stops to ask, as in this meme of the often crushing machine, where someone would raise money to stop orphans from being crushed in the often crushing machine. They will applaud you, say, oh, these guys raised 6 million rands to stop 10 kids from going into an orphan crushing machine. But no one ever stops to ask, why does an orphan crushing machine exist to begin with? And I think that's the basis of what you are asking is, why are we accepting the status quo to be the code, I guess? Who decided on that this should be the term? So I love that, and I want to pick up on that. But before I do, I think we need to give them a round of applause. Thank you, guys. So I'm going to pick up with you just maybe, why does that matter so much?
I think, it's important that we accept the system, if I can call it that. And individuals will very, very, very rarely be able to change the system. It's the collective. And whether you're talking about the creation and multiplication of orphans, it's very difficult to change that as an individual. But collectively, we start to say, it's important that we don't outsource responsibility and accountability. We mustn't do that, because all we're doing is we're deferring difficult conversations and we're perpetuating the status quo. We must ask ourselves, what role do we have to play in this? What are we doing or not doing that is creating this scenario? And the gist of it, you've gotten it. The gist of it is to say, is this a fair status quo? Is this a fair outcome? And how did this outcome get to become what it is? Why are we accepting it as the norm? And it's important to play a part in unraveling mystique. If you don't understand something, say, I don't understand. Can you explain that to me again? What does this mean? And so on and so forth. Sorry, I've just gone on miles, but that's probably the aspect I would have added to that conversation.
Fair enough. And Mark, in terms of, obviously there's lots of the dystopian side of things, and I'm trying to pull out the utopian side of things. But you did mention a point that sort of struck a chord for me when you mentioned that AI needs exactly the same fresh water that I do, and therefore the crops that we're going to have to grow. So, I'm seeing a world where that very finite natural resource is in contention between the machines and the humans. Yeah. And put a positive spin to it, please.
That's not fair. I'll say that because, so you saw there on that number.
Is it on?
Is it on? I say that because I'm an attorney, and one thing I find with lawyers is it's very easy to point out flaws and risks. It's very hard to be optimistic. But I suppose that's why I wanted to draw on that analogy of the AI life cycle. So it's, these AI tools, and it's a commonly used phrase, and I hate to use it. It's like when people say AI is a double-edged sword, I just cringe. but it's true. But it's the leapfrogging ability of the technology. So, where, especially on an African context where we are so resource constrained, something like, it was spoken earlier, aerobotics, where you might not be able to detect, diseases in crops, or it used to be done manually and you can do it in a much quicker process. That will help, and it does help yield, and it will help. Your stat about producing food for 10 billion people, that doesn't really back this point I'm trying to make, but it might make food generation more abundant. But I think it's just very important to remember that AI is not what you see on the screen. It starts in the mines and it ends in the dumps. And so you just have to remember that there's a whole process to it, or different, they call it like AI sovereignty. But AI sovereignty, or I suppose the places where it exists, is across continents, across borders, across technologies, across industries. And all of that comes together to feed like specific tools. The other thing, which I know I'm going slightly off point, but I just wanted to talk to the inevitability, which kind of goes off what JX was saying, of AI. And people see it as something that we have to embrace. But I used to be at Uber, and the one thing that always blew my mind is that we were promoting job creation and at the same time spending as much money as we could in autonomous vehicle technology, right? So driverless cars. So one day the entire workforce would be without jobs. But the angle I want to land on with the inevitability of AI is that autonomous driving is motivated by this idea that it will save lives. When you actually look at the stats of what's killing people, it's drink driving and speed. So if we just didn't drink and obeyed the speed limit, we wouldn't have to spend all that money, use all those extractive resources. Exactly. So I just wanted to end with that, to piggyback back off that, because I think it's an important point, and it goes to what Mpho said about follow the money, essentially. There's billions being spent, but there are much simpler solutions that might be alternatives to AI. Sorry, I wasn't positive, but...
Then we'll leave it to Mpho.
I guess was.
Yes.
I always try to run away from buzzwords, right? For those of us who are old enough to have been around before the big data boom in the 2010s, you would know that artificial intelligence as a concept has existed even before the 50s. The 50s was just a formalization, right? Philosophers like Aristotle spoke about these machines that are going to be intelligent as us, right? And then the 50s was when it was coined. And the Cold War literally drove the AI race. I always say war, particularly in the global north and the east, is good business for research and development, right? Every time there's a war, they pump money. And we saw NLP, this is why languages are important, becoming the front runner at that time, right? The Americans wanted to understand what the Russians are saying, the Russians wanted to understand what the Americans are saying. So how do we do this? We need translation that is not human-based, because sometimes we can't get a translator, bias, spies, and all this stuff. So this is what propelled the race. Now, if you look at what I'm trying to say is that there was a problem, and then the technology solved the problem. There's nowhere where a technology came first, and we try to find the problem. Now, what we usually are now seeing is that we are thinking about AI-powered systems, and I'm going to say tech for today so that it's very, very simple, right? Technology is now driving problems, right? We buy technology, we think about technology, and then we say, okay, and then what is the problem, right? We think mobile apps, let's give them to vegetable vendors in township, and then they're going to use them to tell them how much stock they have. No one said, there was never a time where they were included and said, this is our biggest pain point. There's no data that said, this is what they're struggling with. And therefore, that means that we have moved away from what the vision of AI is that was coined by the Godfathers. And the Godfathers said we wanted operational efficiency. We want to outsource tasks that are just too cumbersome for us so we can use brains for something better. And this is what AI has always been about. Now, of course, we're going to talk about AGI because of our wonderful, export to the US has pumped a lot of money to Neuralink, so we have to talk about AGI because that's how he's going to make money, right? And this is where AGI became a thing. And all these big five guys were talking about AGI for the past 2 years. But the question is, do South Africans have to entertain artificial general intelligence? And the answer is no. We need very context-specific solutions. And we cannot do any context-specific solutions if we do not have contextual problems. What is a wine farmer in Stellenbosch struggling with right now? And how can we help them? How can technology facilitate that? What are smallholder farmers, horticultural farmers struggling with? And what technology can come into play? And they can say, guys, we need access to markets. And they're not saying they need access to China. They're saying access to markets. Maybe sometimes we will just want to meet and buy, seeds as 20 people so we can leverage on group purchasing power and get better discounts, and stop, upping and down to buy seeds or upping and down to go to the market. So this is basically where I would like us to see, run away from AI and think about what our problems are and how technology can solve those problems.
And speaking of which, I would really like to open it up to the audience. Okay, not all at once. We've got 2 questions here, 3 here, and I see 2 there. Okay.
Hello, my name is Muteo Mamabono. I'm a writer and I'm an Indigenous scientist. I want to start my question first by giving the context of using COVID-19. During COVID-19, we saw a lot of corruption that erupted from our government officials in terms of having a global crisis and it being used as an opportunity for pockets to get heavier. What I saw back home in Northwest was a lot of Indigenous people foraging to find lingana, which a lot of us know as Mpho. And this was a powerful tool and herb that was then used to heal people in small households, and it became a preference over going to the actual clinics, and it became such a superfood that now anytime a person has flu, we now opt to use lingana mhlonyane as opposed to going and consulting. And so my question, I think I want to start first with you, Mpho, is when we speak about extractive models of information and data, a lot of people back home are also very precious about these tools that they use and these knowledge systems that they have. How do we educate and prompt people back home about the safe models that they can use in order to extract these knowledge systems that are helpful? And how can we encourage the protection of these data systems? And then my question then comes to, how do we mitigate in the health system, and this is to you, Gumede, to understand how do we then mitigate the problem and the solution when we're talking about AI? How do I train my AI system in conversation with the problem of lack of access to healthcare, and then the lack of access to healthcare, and then using these knowledge systems that I have and creating a system that operates together? Because I 100% agree, and I think I am super excited that someone has brought up a part of this conversation that I've been struggling with, which is how do we take this system and accept it into our society and use it as something that can build it, as opposed to saying no. How do we use it to benefit our people also back home?
Okay. So,
Sorry guys, I'm going to ask to keep the answers not 5 minutes, like a minute. So there's lots of questions. So get to the point.
The point is, one of
And the
things,
questions as well, please.
so one of the things that happens is that we always speak for marginalized communities. We spoke about smallholder farmers, horticulture, subsistence farmers. We make solutions that we never include them for. And COVID-19 actually exposed it in the healthcare industry. Now, over 60 to 70% consult traditional healers before they go to a doctor, even for a toothache, right? So in the face of pandemic, those people are still going to go to traditional healers. And we saw this with the HIV pandemic. Now, if you do not include the healers in public health education, you are running a risk. If you don't include them in the digital space and the digital economy, you are running a risk. And this is precisely what I was initiating during COVID. The horrors that we saw, right? Because the healers themselves were against public health care. They were advocating for Pronya. They were sick themselves, right? But it was such a nightmare. And this actually gets perpetuated even in farming, right? Indigenous knowledge systems, we assume things about culture and people. And the drive of technology is culture and people. There's a reason the EU doesn't need sophisticated banking systems, because they don't suffer as much fraud as us. So for those of you who have banking accounts I have a German banking account. Every time I use it, it never gets blocked. I don't get SMSs. My South African bank card, if I were to travel from here to Italy today and I try to use it without telling my banker, it will get stopped. But the Germans don't need that, right? Banking system again. I come from Soweto. Spaza shop, she means Tamils is a way to take cards. German spreadsheets do not take cards. Germany is a cash country. They love cash. The French love their checkbooks. They've never had to evolve because their population doesn't need that. They are spending more time on energy, climate change, and doing that, digital transformation. Okay, okay, but I think you got the point. Yeah.
Thank you. Just to quickly say that there's a saying that says, if you deny people their culture, you deny them their existence. I don't know if you've heard that. And I would then take that and say, if you reject or delete or omit people's data, you omit their presence or their existence. So if you want to be represented, you need to be, in the true sense of the word, represented. So what feeds the system, which is the data, needs to be there. And I think that's where the essence of the challenge lies. How do you get representation at that level? Because if there's no data coming into the system, like I gave you the olive example, as far as it's concerned, people in that particular township don't like olives. It's going to keep giving them millipap and beans. Full stop.
So just mark on that. Are we not precious about our data? In that, I mean, let's do a survey. If you had an option not to pay tax, but the government could monetize your data. Okay, with a show of hands, who would rather not pay tax and give the data to government? Let them have it. I mean, really. Okay, the Cape Town crowd. Why are you so with your data? What do you know?
I don't know too much, but I know I don't trust my government. Perhaps if I lived in a different country, or the government was a little bit more ethical, or showed us that they could use the data for good, sure. Or then I would actually pay more tax so that they can use it for the better.
So the point though is you fundamentally have no issue in sharing your data if it was to a trusted source, as opposed to paying tax. Thank you for sharing, and Donovan.
So try to be quick on that, but most valuable data is going to Big Tech. And why I would probably still choose to pay tax is not just because I spent a week with the information regulator and have been championing data protection and privacy, but it's because of what Big Tech can do with data. So my research is it's not just about predictive technologies, it's about when they become directive technologies. And why I see AI as a particular problem is that what it's directing is our own thought patterns and processes. And to give an example, and it links on what Mpho said about war, There's a book by Neil deGrasse Tyson, Accessory to War, which I recommend reading. But he speaks to how predictive technologies have been used to actually conquer people. And the example he used was actually to do with food, but it's when Christopher Columbus landed in the Americas. He went to the indigenous people and said, hand over your food, and if you don't, I'm going to block out the sun, because they knew an eclipse was going to come. And those people didn't know that an eclipse was going to come. They didn't hand over the food. The eclipse happened. They gave away the Americas, basically. So protecting our data, in sum, I still think is much more valuable than avoiding tax.
So basically, he's saying he doesn't trust the colonizer. So,
Also tax avoidance, tax evasion, so...
there's a difference.
Hi everyone, I'm Nalini Skakanda from the Daily Maverick. I wanted to ask the panel, whoever wants to answer this question. I know we're speaking about ethics in AI in terms of how our data is being used, as you just mentioned now, but I wanted to ask specifically about creating laws to protect us just in general to what AI can do, even simple things like seeing a video with your face on it and you're dancing, whereas you weren't dancing, you know, that's a light thing, but obviously it can be taken to darker places. And I wanted to know how well we can be able to have policies that are effective, because we're not creating AI, we are like a subject to it, or we're only being used to extract our data. We are consumers and we're not the producers. So how well can we, say South Africa or Kenya or any other African country, be able to really effectively police how AI is being used when you don't have the power?
I can come in very quickly. So I mean, policy is obviously very important. Getting the right, I mentioned the UNESCO principles. Getting the right standards for people to buy in is important. But I think the bigger thing with AI in particular, and for all of us in the room, is having that awareness of what you're dealing with. So I always think of like the Matrix, when Neo would go into the Matrix. They knew they were going into an artificial system and they were prepared to go in. And if we're using like Instagram or whatever it might be, we need to be mindful that that system has been designed for a specific purpose, which is actually not to show us our friends' feeds. It's to keep us on it. And if you have that in mind, the policies and whatnot, which AI is, it's something like ChatGPT 4.0 is 70 billion parameters. So if you have a law, other than using an AI to figure out where it's disobeying the law, you can't actually figure out whether it's compliant or not. But us having that awareness of what we're using, I think, can help to mitigate against these sort of risks and issues that we've been identifying. So that would be my view.
And I noticed on JX's images there were also AI generated of the food, which was sort of I noted that. I was like, but just as another practical example, as being a person in the food space, how we use AI, we've created this digital twin of a real human being. I can't use her name, but it's a lady in Alex. We call her Chomi. In fact, the AI kept on responding to the answers and saying Chomi. So we ended up just calling it Chomi. Anyway, so Chomi is a digital twin of a real person. So we sat for like 3 days and we got the real human being to tell us her life's journey, everything. We just let her talk and talk and talk. And talk and talk and talk. And maybe probe here and there, but we just let them talk. And we took all that data, transcribed it, and put it into an AI we built that then learned to be the digital version of the real human. And it is so scary that it started having mannerisms like the real person. And remember, it's a transcript, so it's no voice, nothing. It started speaking like a person from a cast. Like, I promise you, when it did that, it was at 3 a.m. I was like, whoa. I was shook. I clutched my pearls, and I was the only person in the room at 3 a.m. I was like, yo, and pros and cons. Pro, we now have a customer in the room every time we are looking to launch a product. We go to Chomi, hey Chomi, what do you bank with? Would you do this? And he gives us insights. And then we take those insights and we go to the real person and say, what are your answers? And then we keep machine learning it from the real answers, right? So the upside is now we can quickly make decisions on concepts, marketing things, because now we have a digital human being. So there are positives. Imagine if you can do that with a professor, with scientists, a mechanic, and all of that. All of a sudden, you are now 10x able to do cool things. You can have a farmer with you in your pocket. So there are many, many positives, I think. And let's not forget those. Obviously, there's the reverse side to that in terms of IP, people's likeness, and all of that, right? So, do you want to add anything to?
No, but you're absolutely right. Those were AI generated. and just want to say that when it comes to data, that in itself is not necessarily a bad thing. It's the exploitation and the weaponization of data that's a problem.
Good point.
So it's not just the fact that somebody knows something about you. You know, it can be very important that somebody knows where you live, so that if you have a problem, they can find you and help you.
Yep.
But that's not what we worry about, that they know where we live. It's the nefarious side of that. That's the problem.
But didn't they worry about TV, that you're gonna go blind when you're sitting close to it? It's like these.
So that used to be a thing.
I'm sorry,
Yeah. Just to add on what Mark said, it is very important to understand that the modeling of human intelligence into artificial systems is that they start acting like us. Human beings by nature, we are not ethical. Human beings are biased. So we see that coming in the systems. Human beings like being liked. So social networks have understood this to the T. That's why you like it when someone retweets you or likes your picture, when someone hypes you up. But the dark side then comes when then people realize, okay, I can sway public opinion. I can cause an uprising. I can create 10,000 bots to say the same thing. Because people like to be grouped by like-minded people. There's a study that a colleague and I did that shows that if you put people, right, someone who say I'm liberal, I'm conservative, by the time the discussion is done, even those who think they're liberal have moved to the right. And this we also see on social media.
So you were quoting your own study.
Yes.
Very impressive. Nice. Source me.
Thanks. I hope you forgive me. I want to shift with a new question, if you're happy with
No,
that.
of course.
So over the course of the day today, we've had a lot of conversation about different aspects of kind of AI and its relevance to the food system, and sometimes more generally, we're having important conversations about ethics and language and identity, and that's all great. And I'm curious to ask the panel's perspective on areas that are very challenging within our food system that, in my opinion, we haven't really gotten to in the course of the conversation, which speaks to the fact that South Africa is, on paper, food secure. We produce enough food. If we're going to be focusing on increasing production, that introduces some unintended consequences, or it's good for export and it brings additional income into the country and we grow businesses and it creates jobs. That's all great, but it's not addressing that's an economic challenge, it's not a food systems challenge, right? So we have these very high levels of food insecurity, even though we have plenty of food. We talked about waste, which is great, but if we alleviate waste, we're either increasing charitable giving through SA Harvest or others, or we're increasing supply, in which case the price to farmers might go down, there's increasing price competition, and that might put farmers out of business, which has other challenges. So the question of access, the question of extreme inequality in our society where people can't afford food, lack of infrastructure, things like water, energy reliability, so that people are buying unhealthy, ultra-processed instant noodles as opposed to cooking mealie pop or something else that might feed their family in a more nutritious way. They don't have a fridge because they either can't afford it or they don't have electricity that they can afford, or there's not reliable supply of energy, so it's not worth putting food into a fridge because it still might go off because it might spoil because there's no electricity. So these are some of the challenges that I feel like we haven't really kind of gotten to. So these questions of food and nutrition security that aren't driven by supply, households know what to do for the most part, but they make rational choices based on other issues, right? So a parent would like to buy the fresh, healthy alternative, but if they don't have a fridge, if they got a problem with cockroaches or rats or theft, or they're not at home, or there are other challenges where they can't prepare it, they make choices to feed their families as best they can. And so it's in that context, I'm just asking for a bit of focus before we end the session on kind of this very challenging and real part of the problem. Thank you.
Brave souls.
As I said before, the question is how do we help what's on the ground with technology? So, for instance, and you're correct, food, the entire food system change affects our nutrition and our health. If you don't have access to a fridge, that means you cannot. There's a certain amount of income that you make that doesn't allow you to buy veggies every 2 days, right? The question then is how can technology assist those families? Chatbots are not going to help them. Chef GPT is nice, Grok is nice, but Grok is nice for middle and upper middle class in their homes asking, what can I do to go betting today? It doesn't really help much. Now, the question would be then, how do we provide a solution that helps them understand what they can grow and what can exist in the ecosystem? We can't help them with budgeting, right? These people are busy, they work too many hours a day. Are they part of a cooperative? And I always say it's always easier to go straight to the cooperative or to how the community actually works. I come from a township where cooperatives are doing quite a lot with the education sector, and they partner, they do everything in schools, but some of the things that we plant are really not indigenous to the areas that we live in, so they can tend to, the education is also not there. How do we then educate using technology? Now, it democratizes education. What is agricultural education in townships and rural areas, right, for cooperatives? How do we access markets, but not huge markets, but markets and say, guys, every 3 months we know that this is what we're going to grow. How do we take it still, right, and sell it at a local grocery store? It still happens. I live in the Bundus in Joburg, right? And I use my local food and veg, and all the farmers in my area sell them. So we go there, and I know I'm not going to get strawberries when they're out of season. It's a fact. But this is kind of the way that we live, but it's a different class. Now, how can we take the same really thinking and put it at the lower LSM? So that, and number 2, we should never try to replace people's way of life, because this is what repels them from technology. What is the foundational technology that speaks to the people? Assumptions should not be made. Let's not make an assumption that people can afford to buy data. Because how much does an average South African have to work to buy 1 GB of data? Number 2, let's not assume that people can have access to smartphones. I know they're saying there's an 80% penetration of smartphones, but are we really literate on the smartphones, right? So how do we make foundational tech that is easy to use, that is cheap to use, that doesn't replace a way of life, but actually helps people's other lives? And this happens. We always said we are technophobes. One last question, comment. But our grandmothers have come to embrace WhatsApp. They've come to embrace Uber. So they can embrace any technology that speaks to their immediate need. And what does their immediate need is the actual question, particularly for food security and speaking to a language they understand.
Yeah, I'll come at that particular point from as a former producer of food, and so a shout out to all the farmers in the house. Viva farmers, viva! So the great thing about having spent 7 years is getting to understand how difficult it is to grow food. And when you waste food, you waste all the effort, all the energy, all the costs that went into that food, and quite frankly, you never pay the full value of water. No matter what the water bill is, that's not the full value of it. So you're actually wasting everybody else's resource in the process of wasting food. And that's why with food systems, for me, it's important that we look at where is the bucket leaking? Because you can put in as much water as you want into the bucket of food and food systems. But if the leaking is faster than the rate at which you're filling in that bucket, you're actually driving yourself to a point of insanity. So looking at where the bucket leaks the most, it's in along the whole value chain. You get the production, processing, packaging, distribution, retail, wholesale sort of value chain. Where it leaks the most is in the processing. So it's the one just after you've picked it. I don't know if you as a farmer, you would know. The moment you pick that thing, you've killed it. If you pick a strawberry, all you're doing now is fighting against time before that strawberry becomes fraught, as they say in Afrikaans. So the only thing you're doing is you're delaying the dying of that thing. So when you pick it, you're fighting against time to make it safe to eat before it becomes inedible. And AI can help a great deal take the guesswork out of that. Besides processing the actual crop itself, in terms of discriminating which should go where, it can aggregate as well. Know you and your neighbor, you can both input into an app. I've got 60 cabbages, I've got 90 cabbages, I've got 300 cabbages. All of a sudden, Pick and Pay or Checkers or Woolworths knows that from that area, they can, on a very reliable basis, secure 500 cabbages. But they won't look at you with 30 cabbages. It's simply not going to work because you don't have the volume and the supply that gives comfort to a retailer that there's consistency of supply. So those are some of the aspects, and I just use that as an example. Not that they'll accept 30 cabbages and 50, but just as an example, AI can assist, pull together different sources so that you are no longer this individual farmer doing a small bit of this on your own. And then on the consumption side, what do you engage the food as at the store? And actually, we've got a petition going, and if I may use this opportunity, please sign up the petition, which is to change food labels. We've actually, there's a study, I think it was done by the University of Pretoria, that empirically demonstrates that the current expiry date labels are confusing for most consumers. When people look at those labels, I can almost bet without fear of contradiction that the vast majority of the people in this room actually don't understand what the real meaning of the labels on the food. You see use by, you see sell by, you see best before. Those things, some people think they mean the same thing. Some people think they mean this, but they actually mean that, and so on and so forth. So the long and short of it, that is the second biggest leaking of the bucket. The first one is the processing because of how it's processed and managed and graded and whatever the case may be. The second biggest is actually the lack of understanding or the confusion that comes about from not really interpreting the label correctly. And I don't blame people. It's just that it's presented in a confusing way. Thank you.
Thank you. Got an opportunity to take two more questions.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Asim Ashimali, and I'm a researcher at UWC. I have a question that is kind of relating or touching on two topics concurrently, and it's the topic that Mrs. Mpho was referencing to and Mr. Gaffley. My question is there or do you envision a world that AI can be used to prolong the existence of ancestral intelligence?
So, I mean, I do envisage that world, and I think it's, as long as you can turn, you're talking about oral communication into text, and that can be used to train the AIs, the algorithms. algorithms. You can kind of encode it for, let's say, well, I don't think anything's eternal, but for a long time. But the caveat to that is that we need to remember that, and it's something like a status, UCT's compute power at their computer science facility is 32, and a Gen AI tool needs 50,000 to be able to actually handle things properly. So why I say that is that it's going to come to big tech, and they're going to hold that information. And with that, you're going to have big tech's viewpoints, their values, etc., getting merged with these ancestral intelligences. So I do think it stands a high likelihood of being corrupted and pushing through the agendas of wherever you say bring the technology from. So that would be my view on that. Yes, but it's difficult.
I actually have a view on that. I think it might actually, I'm in concurrence, but I think it might not be on the cloud. I think death tech's value is not being on a cloud where it can actually be corrupted. Imagine a world where, like Africans, we're very big on burying people and spend a ton of money on the tombstone. Like, why is a tombstone a piece of granite? Why can't that be a digital, maybe offline, but a digital tool where great-grandchildren can go there and listen to great-grandma tell stories, whatever, but it might be localized, right? For example, your digital footprint, what happens to it when you die? Like, you've got such massive social media and all of that. One of the things I wish people would do, if you're a celebrity and you die, you've got like 10 million followers, why not bequeath those like you do with body parts? You know what I mean? Because a NGO like us could benefit from your user base, right? Like, you could put a rule that we can advertise once every quarter. But to an audience you had when you were alive, no different. I mean, you're not going to use it, right? We could find value in it. But I think those nuanced type thinking, those left field things, I promise you are going to be a mainstay in some shape or form going forward. My 2 cents.
Yeah, but one thing is, one of the powers of intelligent systems and the power of cloud and of blockchain, all of these included is the fact that anytime, anywhere access, safety and secure, and this is what makes it very powerful for cultural preservation, including cultural knowledge, right? What goes at which season, what goes where, what is indigenous to South Africa, what was brought into South Africa that is now eating at our water bed as it goes. All this, AI can preserve it and make it accessible to anyone who needs to know it. The question is, who's going to fund the data collection and who stands to make money? And right now, as Mark says, the narrative is run by big tech, and they don't see profits in investing in this kind of knowledge. However, grassroots movements are already doing this. I don't want to take away from universities and NPOs. UCT, for instance, has led in terms of virtual reality, cultural preservation. UJ, we did Sophia Town prior to 1957. So we are making strides. So yes, it's really one of the best use cases.
And maybe there's a parting shot on that, and it's not that difficult to do. I'm rather passionate about the subject, so don't judge. We listen, we don't judge, right? Because the use case is the one piece that is easier to do than anything else. Because all you have to do, and I've done this, so go to ChatGPT and download chat history. In fact, this is what I do. This is how I recruit people. Oh, did I just say that wrong? Okay, so you go to ChatGPT, to WhatsApp, you download the chat history. All right? So I've been certain chats that I've been on for like 10 years. It's like an alumni for ex-Microsoft guy. So you just download the whole chat, and you, as a text file, you put it in ChatGPT and say profile everybody. You'd be blown away how accurate it is in profiling people's personas. Well, that's cool, but so what? Then you go to those personality assessment tools, like Myers-Briggs and those personality assessment tools. And then you tell it to personalize everybody based on those tools. My goodness. What it tells you. So now you can recruit people who are the same personality. And then what you do even better, then you take, because then I'm in my WhatsApp group with my team, right? So all 18 of us. And then I can say, who best matches, out of these people that I'm thinking, who best matches the profiles of the people we have? Because then I can make a better team in terms of, they may not all have to be the same, but they could be different, but they make a better match. The point is, it is so easy to do. It's what is going to limit our ability to achieve greatness is just our ability to think creatively about using what we have access to. It's no longer going to be access. Cool? Happiness? Yes, no, maybe?
It's not
Is it legal? Is it? Oh, is it legal and ethical? No, okay. This is a parting shot. This is the last question. Actually, I don't want to know the answer to that. Ignorance is bliss. Moving right along. Thank you very much, everybody. You are awesome. Round of applause for the kids. Bye, guys.